Welcome to ZOZO Sleepy Stories. We're thrilled to have you here for another cozy tale to spark your imagination. If you enjoy our stories, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with your friends and family. Your support helps us keep the bedtime magic alive. Now, grab your blanket, get comfy, and let's dive into tonight's story. Long ago, before the world was as we know it, warmth was not a certainty. The rivers ran cold even in summer, and the hearths of men flickered with weak embers that died too quickly. It was whispered that the gods themselves had turned away, locking away the great flame of life high upon Olympus, a treasure no mortal hand could reach. The land grew weary beneath this frost, and in the villages of men, people prayed into the silence of ashes. Yet, in one forgotten corner of the earth, by the clang of hammer and the sigh of bellows, a child was born. His name was Kaelen, and his story begins not in a palace, not in a temple, but in the forge of a humble blacksmith woman. She was called Myra, a woman with arms as strong as ironwood and a gaze steady as the horizon. Her hands had shaped weapons that warriors carried into glory, and her anvil had sung louder than any hymn. She was not royalty, not even rich, just a mortal whose skill whispered of the divine. But the gods had noticed her. Or rather, one god had. A wandering spirit of fire, an exile cast out from Olympus, had lingered in her workshop's smoke. Some said he was the forgotten brother of Hephaestus. Some said a shadow of Prometheus himself. Whatever truth lay there, it was enough. On one moonlit night, the forge burned brighter than it ever had, and in the morning Myra carried a child with eyes like embers. Kaelen. From the first breath, he was unlike the others. He did not cry when born, only opened his eyes and the forge flame leapt as if it had recognized kin. The midwives gasped, whispering that such a child could not belong to mortals alone. Some crossed themselves. Some spat for protection. But Myra held him close, whispering, "Flame does not choose whom to serve. It chooses whom to trust." Kaelen grew swiftly, like sparks chasing the wind. By 5, he could lift a hammer heavier than boys twice his size. By 7, he forged his first blade, one so balanced and true that even seasoned soldiers marveled. Yet the village did not celebrate him. Children avoided him, priests refused blessings, and mothers warned their little ones not to stare at his glowing eyes for too long. They called him the child of ash, the cursed flame, the one who would not stay long in this world. But Myra loved him fiercely. In the quiet hours while others slept, she taught him not just to strike metal, but to listen to it. "Flame obeys the patient," she told him, her voice low over the hiss of quenching water. "Not the proud. Fire is not your servant, it is your teacher." And Kaelen listened. Even so, the world beyond their forge was changing. Winters bit deeper, summers shortened, and storms lingered longer than memory. Crops wilted, rivers froze, and men spoke of punishment from the heavens. Some whispered of Prometheus, who once stole fire for mankind, and of the gods who swore never again to share such a gift. Whatever the cause, the truth was clear. The world was dimming. The warmth of life was fading. Kaelen felt it in his own forge. Each day the flames grew harder to coax. Each night the iron grew stubborn beneath his hammer. The warmth that once answered him now resisted. and though he was still young, a weight settled on his shoulders. It was not pride, it was something quieter, heavier, like a calling. On the eve of his 16th year, Kaelen stood alone before the forge, staring into the faint glow that once leapt so eagerly. His mother had grown weary, her hands scarred from years of work, her eyes shadowed with worry. He thought of her bent back, of the villagers shivering in their unlit homes, of children curling against cold hearths. He thought of the whispers, the old tales of the eternal flame locked away by gods who no longer cared for mortal lives. And then he thought of fire itself, not as a weapon, not as punishment, but as memory. He remembered his mother's words, the way the forge light made her smile, the way warmth gathered people together. Fire was not meant to be hidden. Fire was meant to be shared. That night, as the moon rode high and pale across the sky, Kaelen dreamed. He stood on a mountain that seemed endless, its roots plunging into darkness, its summit crowned with light. The wind whispered his name, not in fear, not in mockery, but in recognition. And at the peak, beyond storms and shadows, he saw it, the flame. Not red, not orange, but white, pure as dawn, alive as breath. It called to him as though it had always known he was coming. When he woke, the forge was dark, yet in the ashes a faint ember glowed. He cupped it in his hands, and for the first time he did not feel warmth. He felt direction. He did not yet know the journey ahead, the gates guarded by death, the trickster god with feathered sandals, the storms that would tear at his soul. He did not know of the price whispered by the oracle, the sacrifice that even gods trembled to name. But he knew one thing, that the world had grown too cold, and someone had to climb the mountain. So, the boy who was called Cursed, the boy who glowed with embers, the boy of ashes and silence, made his choice. He would seek the flame. And as he stepped from the forge into the night, the stars above seemed to bend. The wind stilled, and even the shadows shifted, as if the world itself was watching. This was the beginning of Kaelen's story. Not of power, not of vengeance, but of a forgotten fire waiting to return. The road from the forge led Kaelen farther than he had ever wandered. Beyond the fields of his childhood, past the silent villages and the crooked chapels where priests no longer prayed, the land grew lonely. Stones jutted like broken teeth from the earth. Rivers ran thin as silver threads, and the trees bent under the weight of frost. It was as if the world itself had grown old, tired of waiting for warmth that never came. Yet Kaelen did not falter. With each step, the ember he carried in his chest glowed faintly, guiding him forward like a heartbeat he did not wholly own. His mother's words lingered behind him. Fire is not yours to command. It is yours to respect. Days turned into weeks, and then one evening, as the sun fell pale behind the hills, he saw it. An ancient temple, long abandoned, crumbling like bones left too long in the open air. Ivy curled through its broken columns, and its once mighty gates leaned as though weary of standing. This was no place for prayer anymore, yet something in Kaelen's blood stirred. He knew he was meant to enter. Inside, the silence was heavier than stone. The floor was cracked, altars overturned, and yet the air still smelled faintly of incense, as if memory itself clung to the walls. He descended deeper, into the hollow belly of the ruin, where shadows pressed close and the faint trickle of water echoed like whispers. And there, seated upon a throne of shattered marble, was the oracle. Her form was draped in violet robes, frayed with age, her skin pale as ash. Though her eyes were clouded and sightless, they burned with storms. Kaelen froze, for he had heard tales of oracles, women who spoke in riddles, their words twisting like smoke, never clear, never kind. Yet when she inhaled, the sound cut the silence like a blade, and her voice spilled forth, not as prophecy, but as sentence. Kaelen, she hissed, though he had not spoken his name. Child of Ember, flames chosen, you will climb the mountain, you will take the fire, and you will die. The words struck him like hammer to anvil. He did not flinch, but his heart stumbled, for he had never thought of death as part of his path. He had dreamed of flame, of warmth, of renewal, but not of his end. Still, he stepped forward. "If death is the price," he said quietly, "then let me pay it." The oracle tilted her head, her blind eyes swirling like storm clouds. For a moment, she seemed amused. Then she rose, her movements slow, drifting as if smoke itself shaped her limbs. "The gods will oppose you," she said. "The world will demand your failure. Fire does not belong to mortals. It was stolen once, and the punishment was chains without end. Prometheus still bleeds for what you would dare." Kaelen's fists clenched at his sides. "Then I will bleed, too." A silence followed, long, sharp, alive. And then, to his surprise, the oracle laughed. Not cruelly, but with the weariness of one who had seen too many fates end the same way. "You already are," she whispered. Her head bowed, her body slackened, and a sigh escaped her lips like the last breath of a dying flame. Smoke curled from her mouth, dimming into the shadows. The chamber quivered. Thunder groaned beyond the mountain, and then stillness. Kaelen was left alone, her words burning in his ears. He turned, the stone halls echoing beneath his feet, and climbed back toward the fading light of dusk. But though he walked in silence, the prophecy followed him like a shadow, whispering with every step, "You will take the fire, and you will die." He camped that night at the edge of a ruined field. The stars hung low, scattered like sparks across black iron. Sleep would not come easily. He lay awake, staring into the small fire he had coaxed to life. The flame trembled, fragile, and for the first time, he wondered if it mocked him. Was he truly meant to bring back the flame? Or was he simply another mortal reaching for something too great, too forbidden? He thought of Prometheus, chained to the rock, liver torn day after day by a vulture's beak. Would his fate be any kinder? And yet, he thought of the children shivering in dark homes. He thought of his mother, still hammering in the cold. He thought of the way the world had grown gray, its colors fading without fire's warmth. Could he turn away from that? No, he could not. Kaelen sat upright and pressed his palms close to the small fire before him. It flickered weakly, but when he leaned forward, whispering softly, it steadied. The flame bent toward him as if listening. "Then I will carry you," he murmured, "even if it means I am consumed." And for a moment, the fire flared bright, casting his face in amber light. At dawn, Kaelen resumed his journey. The land grew harsher. The hills steepened into jagged cliffs, rivers into gorges, the path into shadow. The closer he drew to Olympus, the more the air thickened, heavy with something older than storm or stone. The birds had gone silent. Even the wind seemed reluctant to move. By the third night, he reached a cavern mouth set deep within the mountain's roots. Its opening yawned like a wound, exhaling a chill not of air, but of memory. Bones littered the ground, faintly glowing with strange light. The villagers had spoken of this place with fear. They called it the Gate of Death. And Kaelen knew, without being told, that what lay beyond was no road for mortals. Still, he stepped forward. The air scraped his soul as if testing its weight. He descended slowly, each step echoing like a bell toll. The deeper he went, the louder it became, a sound like breathing. Heavy, layered, vast. Cerberus, the guardian of the underworld. Kaelen tightened his grip on the satchel at his side. Inside was the collar he had forged. Obsidian, iron, and a final ember from his mother's forge. He had carved 3 names into its surface, each one whispered as he worked. Memory, loyalty, grief. He did not come with sword or shield, but with this, an offering not of battle, but of understanding. The breathing grew louder. The cavern widened into a clearing, and there, sprawled upon ash and bone, lay the beast. 3 heads, each dreaming in its own rhythm. Its fur was darker than absence. Its ears twitched. Its chest rose and fell like a mountain with each breath. Kaelen did not draw a weapon. He knelt, held the collar in his hands, and began to hum. It was a song his mother had sung when the nights grew too cold, when the world seemed too large and cruel, a lullaby of warmth. The left head stirred. The middle lifted one amber eye. The right growled low, then stilled. They listened, and in that silence, Kaelen slipped the collar on. Cerberus exhaled, long and low, and the cavern walls shuddered. Behind the beast, a door carved of shadow swung open, not with rage, but with respect. Kaelen rose, his chest burning with both fear and fire. He had touched death, and death, for the first time, had stepped aside. And so the boy of embers walked through the gate into the mountain that led not only upward to Olympus, but inward to his fate. The oracle's words echoed once more, but softer now, as if carried on a distant wind. You will take the fire, and you will die. Yet Kaelen no longer trembled, for even if death waited, he would go. Because the world was waiting, too. The path beyond the gate of death was no ordinary road. It did not lead straight upward as mountains often do. Instead, it wound in spirals, doubled back upon itself, and sometimes vanished altogether, swallowed by clouds or darkness. Kaelen soon understood that Olympus was not simply stone and snow. It was alive. The mountain breathed, shifted, and resisted him at every step. The air grew thinner as he climbed, biting into his chest like knives of ice. The rocks beneath his hands cut his skin raw, and the wind howled with voices that were not voices at all, echoes of prayers once spoken and forgotten. Sometimes he thought he heard laughter, sometimes weeping. But he climbed still, his mortal blood spilling on the jagged stone, his divine spark burning hotter with each struggle. By the second day, the storms gathered. Lightning danced along the ridges, not striking, only circling, as if the gods themselves paced above, waiting. Thunder rolled so low it rattled his ribs. Each step felt heavier, not because of the mountain, but because of the eyes he could not see, watching, judging, daring him to falter. And then, as suddenly as silence after a storm, Kaelen was no longer alone. A man stood ahead on a ledge, leaning casually against the rock as if the climb had cost him nothing. His cloak fluttered in the wind, loose and travel-worn. His sandals, tied with delicate feathers, seemed to hover just above the stone. His eyes glinted sharp as glass, and his smile, crooked, playful, dangerous, belonged to no mortal. The stranger said, spinning a coin lazily between his fingers. I thought you'd be taller. Kaelen stopped, his breath ragged. Who are you? The man pushed off the rock and began to walk beside him without ever lifting a foot, as though the ground itself bent to his will. "You already know," he said. "Messenger, thief, trickster. Call me Hermes." The name struck like a bell. Kaelen knew the tales. Hermes, swift-footed herald of Olympus, patron of liars and travelers alike. Some called him guide, others called him thief. None called him merciful. Kaelen said nothing. He only continued to climb. Hermes chuckled, the coin vanishing into thin air. "I know why you're here," he said, his voice light, almost musical. "You want to steal fire, again. Sweet, noble, stupid." Kaelen's jaw tightened. "Then stop me." "Stop you?" Hermes raised his brows, amused. "Oh no, I have no need to dirty my hands. I'm here to make sure you understand the story you're walking into. You think this is your tale, boy of embers? It's not. It never was. It belongs to the gods." Kaelen's grip on the rock tightened, his knuckles split and bleeding. "And yet," he said, steady, "here I am." For the first time, Hermes's grin faltered. The wind shifted, cold and sharp. He stepped closer, his voice dropping low. "Do you know why the flame was locked away? It was not because it was precious. It was because it was dangerous. Prometheus thought he was giving mankind a gift. Instead, he gave them weapons, war, ambition without end. The fire you seek is no gentle hearth. It is hunger." Kaelen turned to face him, his eyes glowing faintly like coals. "Then perhaps the gods have forgotten what hunger feels like." Something flickered in Hermes's expression. Irritation, perhaps, or fear. He reached out, pressing 2 fingers to Kaelen's chest. Pain surged, sharp and searing, but not in flesh. It tore deeper, into the threads of his being, unraveling something he had never named. Kaelen staggered, gasping. "The fire you seek," Hermes whispered, his voice colder than the storm around them, "will burn everything you are. It will not give. It will take. Remember this when your bones are ash." And then he was gone. No flash, no thunder, only silence. Kaelen sank to his knees, clutching his chest where the touch still throbbed. The ember within him flared wildly, not with strength, but with warning. The curse had begun. The climb grew crueler. Each breath tasted of iron. Each step left his legs trembling. But worse than the exhaustion was the weight in his chest. It was not a wound. It was erosion. Slowly, piece by piece, something within him was being scraped away, leaving raw emptiness behind. Yet he did not turn back. When his hands slipped, the ember steadied him. When the wind tried to hurl him into the abyss, the thought of cold villages, of children without warmth, pulled him higher. By the 4th day, the world itself seemed to thin. Trees no longer grew, birds no longer flew. Even the stars overhead seemed to recoil, dimming against the vast black. Olympus had stripped away everything unnecessary. It demanded sacrifice with each step. Kaelen bled. He burned, and still he climbed. At last, he crested a ridge above the storm. The clouds rolled below him, restless seas of thunder, but the sky above was strangely calm, vast and endless. In the distance, glowing faintly against the dark, he saw it, the summit, and at its center, a light, the eternal flame. Kaelen's heart surged, though the pain in his chest throbbed harder with every breath. The brazier blazed white, not flickering, but steady, alive. It did not look like fire at all. It looked like a soul. He took a step toward it, then another, and for the first time since the journey began, the mountain did not resist. The winds stilled. The stone grew steady beneath his feet. The sky itself seemed to hold its breath. But Hermes's words clung to him like frost. "The fire will burn everything you are." Kaelen stood at the edge of the clearing, torn between awe and dread. The flame called to him, not with voice but with recognition, as if it had always been waiting. And Kaelen knew. The prophecy had begun to unfold. He did not reach for it yet, not tonight. He sank to his knees, the ember in his chest pulsing with painful rhythm. He stared at the white blaze, letting its light wash over him. If death was truly the price, then so be it. But tomorrow the choice would come. Tonight he would remember who he was. A boy born of ash, a son of a blacksmith, a spark carried too far to turn back now. And, as the mountain held him in silence, the flame waited, steady as the heartbeat of the world. At dawn, Kaelen woke with frost on his lashes and fire in his chest. The summit lay only a short climb away, yet every step toward it carried the weight of destiny. The air grew unnaturally still, as if the mountain itself was no longer resisting but observing. Even the clouds below hung motionless. A sea of silence spread beneath the heavens. At last, he stood before it. The eternal flame. It burned within a brazier of blackened stone, carved by hands so ancient that no god living remembered their names. The pedestal was unadorned. No jewels, no gold, no trumpets to announce its presence. Only the flame itself, white and pure, alive with a glow that was not of this world. It did not flicker. It did not sway with the wind. It watched. Kaelen's breath caught. He had imagined fire that roared, fire that dazzled, fire that demanded worship. But this flame was not spectacle. It was presence. It felt less like a fire and more like an eye, searching him, measuring him. He stepped closer. The heat did not sear him. Instead, it entered him, curling through his veins, awakening the ember in his chest until it pulsed like a second heartbeat. He felt both small and vast, like a boy before a god and a god before eternity. Visions spilled across his mind in waves. He saw the first cave fire lit by trembling hands. He saw torches guiding lost wanderers across deserts. He saw blacksmiths forging blades, farmers warming their children, sailors finding stars by flame on the horizon. He saw cities rise in glory, crowned in firelight, and he saw them fall, burned by the very gift that gave them life. The eternal flame was not simply warmth, it was memory, creation and destruction braided into one. Kaelen trembled. He thought of Hermes' warning, "The fire will burn everything you are," and he thought of the oracle's sentence, "You will take the fire, and you will die." He could turn away, leave it here, let humanity endure the cold and forget warmth until the end of days. It would be safer, cleaner. He would live, perhaps even grow old in some hidden corner of the earth. But then he heard her voice, his mother's, echoing in memory. Flame obeys those who listen, not those who command. And he remembered why he had climbed, not for power, not for pride, for the children shivering in the night, for the homes gone dark, for the world that had forgotten how to glow. Kaelen reached out. Time faltered. The moment his fingers brushed the white blaze, the world cracked open. The flame did not burn him. It rewrote him. His bones cracked, reshaping into something brighter, stronger. His skin split like cooling metal, glowing veins pulsing with light. He fell to his knees, soundless, as fire poured through him, erasing the boy and forging something else. His scream was not heard but felt, a roar of transformation vibrating through the stones of Olympus itself. The brazier flickered, then dimmed, then went cold, because the flame no longer lived there. It had chosen him. Kaelen collapsed, smoke rising from his fingertips, but his eyes glowed like dawn. Each breath he drew spread warmth outward, rippling across the mountain, trickling down through the clouds toward the frost-bound villages below. The eternal flame was no longer a treasure to be stolen. It had become him. As he staggered to his feet, the mountain shifted. No longer did Olympus resist. The stones grew steady beneath him. The winds fell silent. The sky cleared as if in recognition. He was no longer trespasser. He was torchbearer. Everywhere his foot touched, frost melted. The cursed winds softened. The air smelled not of smoke, but of renewal, like spring remembered after a long winter. Yet Kaelen was not whole. His body trembled, barely able to bear what it carried. The flame was too vast, too ancient. His mortal shell cracked under its weight. He knew then that Hermes had spoken truth. The fire would consume him, not in anger, but in inevitability. Still, he descended. He passed broken statues of gods who had once been worshipped, their faces chipped and hollow. He passed the cavern where Cerberus had guarded the gate, but the beast was gone, as if even death had bowed aside for what Kaelen had become. When he reached the world below, the first village he entered was silent. People huddled in huts of cold stone, their breath clouding the air. Kaelen stepped into the square, raised his hand, and from his fingertips a flame leapt into the nearest hearth. It roared to life. Gasps rose, cries of awe. Then, one by one, other fires sparked in homes, leaping from ember to ember, as though the eternal flame had been waiting all along for its bearer. Children laughed, old women wept, men clutched each other's shoulders. The cold was gone. Warmth had returned. Kaelen did not speak. He could not. His voice was smoke, his breath fire. He simply walked, and wherever he went, light followed. But the cost grew heavier. His hair shimmered like molten gold. His skin cracked in dark seams that glowed from within. He was dying, yet not fading. He was becoming something else. Less flesh, more flame. He thought of his mother's forge. He thought of the lullabies she hummed while hammering steel. He thought of her teaching him to respect fire, not command it. And he knew his final steps would take him back to where he began. But that was not tonight. Tonight, he walked through the world, leaving warmth in his wake. And everywhere the fires burned, the people whispered his name. Not as curse, not as fear, as gratitude. Kaelen. No statue would be carved for him, no temple raised, no hymn sung in polished halls. His memory would live in the quietest places, in the crackle of a hearth, in the spark that leaps when flint strikes stone, in the comfort of strangers gathering close against the dark. He had not stolen the flame. He had become it, and though his body trembled, though the weight of the eternal fire gnawed at what little remained of him, he walked on, because the world had remembered how to glow, and that was enough. The first fires spread quickly. From village to village, the warmth returned, first as astonishment, then as celebration. Families huddled close to hearths that had long stood cold. Smoke curled once more from chimneys, winding upward like prayers. Farmers saw frost retreat from their fields. Children, who had never known a summer without shivering, laughed at the miracle of warmth. And everywhere, in every flickering flame, Kaelen's presence was felt. He did not need to speak. The people did not ask. They only watched as he passed, a figure whose very footsteps left melted ground behind him, whose breath softened the cruel winds. To some, he looked like a man wrapped in firelight. To others, he was hardly mortal at all, his body already shimmering like a coal at the edge of breaking. But no matter what they saw, they knew his gift was for them. Yet Kaelen knew the truth. Each gift carried a cost. His transformation began subtly. At first, it was a faint tremor in his hands, the way his fingers glowed faintly at night. Then came the cracks along his skin, thin lines of ember splitting across his arms and chest. When he touched water, it hissed. When he slept, sparks rose from his breath. The people whispered legends around him, but Kaelen felt none of their awe. Only the weight of what was leaving him. He could feel it, his mortality unraveling, his body giving way to something older and harsher. One evening, he sat beside a village fire. Families gathered around, laughing, sharing food, children playing in the glow. He smiled faintly, but when he reached out, one child grabbed his hand and pulled back with a cry. Kaelen's skin had burned him, without Kaelen even realizing. The boy's mother rushed forward, scooping him into her arms. Her eyes met Kaelen's. There was no hatred there, no fear, only sorrow. And somehow that was worse. Kaelen withdrew his hand, curling it into a fist. The cracks along his palm glowed brighter, spreading. He knew then that Hermes' words were not empty. The flame will burn everything you are. Still, he rose the next morning and walked on. The gods, high upon Olympus, felt the shift. The eternal flame, once their guarded prize, now moved freely through mortal lands. But they did not strike. They did not summon thunder or cast plagues. For the first time in ages, Olympus grew quiet, as though unsure whether to rage or to bow. Zeus, it was said, clenched his lightning in silence. Hera turned her gaze away. Athena studied, calculating. And Hades, in his deep halls, smiled faintly, as though he had seen this coming all along. Even gods can hesitate when reminded of purpose. Kaelen's journey carried him at last to the edge of his homeland. The forge of his mother, Myra, stood quiet. Its fires had long gone cold, its tools rusting in the shadows. She was gone. Whether claimed by age or by grief, Kaelen did not know. He stepped inside. Dust lay heavy on the workbenches. The anvil bore the scars of years long past. Yet, as Kaelen entered, the air shifted. The embers within him pulsed, and the forge flared alive as though welcoming its child home. For the first time, Kaelen wept. Not from weakness, but from memory. This was where it had begun, where his mother had taught him that fire was not to be commanded, but respected, where he had learned that flame was less about power and more about presence. He placed his hand upon the anvil. The cracks along his skin glowed brighter, heat spilling out in waves. Sparks leapt from his chest, striking the forge, igniting it. The flames rose high, singing in a chorus with the heartbeat of the eternal fire. Kaelen smiled faintly. He whispered into the roar, "Mother, the world is warm again." But he could feel it now, the unraveling. Each step forward cost him something more. His hair shimmered constantly, gold turning to fire. His voice cracked like thunder when he tried to speak. And at night, when he lay down, he no longer dreamed as men dream. He saw only fire, endless and consuming, yet filled with memory. He dreamed of Prometheus, chained and bleeding. He dreamed of the oracle, her words echoing like a dirge. "You will take the fire, and you will die." He dreamed of Hermes' fingers pressing against his chest, of the curse unraveling within him. And yet, through it all, he dreamed of the laughter of children by the fire, of his mother's calloused hands guiding his own, of the quiet warmth that had once filled their home. It was enough. The people began to tell new stories. They said when Kaelen passed, their hearths lit on their own. They said when he walked into a frozen forest, the trees blossomed overnight. Blacksmiths claimed their forges grew hotter at his presence, their hammers striking truer. Yet each miracle carved away at Kaelen's body. His limbs trembled, his steps slowed. And though the people called him hero, savior, torchbearer, he knew the truth. He was burning, not with fury, not with punishment, but with purpose. One night, he found himself standing alone upon a hill. Below him stretched fields newly green, villages lit by firelight, rivers steaming with thaw. Above him, the stars shimmered quietly, as if they too watched. Kaelen spread his hands. Sparks leapt from his palms, scattering into the night. The cracks along his arms glowed so brightly they were almost blinding. He whispered to the sky, "If this is death, let it be gentle." And in that moment, the wind softened. The mountain storm ceased. Even Olympus itself trembled, not in rage, but in silence. The gods had not struck him down. They had not chained him, for they understood now. Kaelen had not defied them with war or pride. He had reminded them of purpose. He descended from the hill, his body weakening but his flame spreading. He no longer carried the fire. He was the fire. And though his form would not last, his gift already had. Wherever warmth rose again, whether in homes, in temples, or in hidden caves, Kaelen's story would linger, not in statues, not in songs sung by priests, but in the simplest act of gathering close to the glow, remembering what it meant to be alive. And so his steps carried him onward, though each was heavier than the last. He did not stop. He could not. For as long as fire burned, the world would remember him. Kaelen, the boy of ash. Kaelen, the torchbearer. Kaelen, who paid the price of light. Kaelen walked, though every step now trembled. His body was no longer his own. Where once there had been muscle and sinew, now cracks of light ran through him, glowing seams that widened with each passing day. His skin no longer felt like skin. It was brittle, like cooled obsidian veined with fire. His breath smoked even when the air was warm, and when he closed his eyes he no longer saw darkness but the endless pulse of flame. He was fading, yet he was also becoming. The villagers who caught sight of him did not see the frailty. They saw only a figure wrapped in radiance. Children whispered that he was the sun walking among them. Mothers placed their hands on their hearts as he passed, their eyes wet with reverence. Men bowed their heads, not out of fear, but gratitude. To Kaelen, their awe felt heavy. He wanted no worship. He wanted only for them to be warm, to see their homes lit again, their fields alive, their children laughing. And in this, he found comfort. For though his body broke, the world healed. Nights grew stranger. Kaelen no longer slept as mortals did. When he lay down, his body hummed faintly, like an ember refusing to die. In those moments he dreamed not of places but of times, of all the fires that had ever burned. He felt the warmth of the first campfire where hunters huddled together against wolves. He heard the chants of priests lifting torches before marble altars. He saw blacksmiths bending iron into swords and plows. He felt the rage of flames consuming cities in war and the tenderness of candles placed beside graves. Each vision pressed into him until he could no longer tell where the fire ended and he began. He was not Kaelen alone. He was every flame that ever was, and it frightened him. Because the more he carried, the less of himself remained. One evening, as he walked through a valley, he came upon a river frozen solid. Villagers stood on the banks, striking it with axes, desperate for water. Kaelen stepped forward. Without a word, he pressed his hand to the ice. It cracked. Steam rose. Water burst forth. flowing swift and clear. The people cried out in wonder, rushing to drink, to fill their jars. Some fell to their knees before him, but Kaelen staggered back, his chest heaving. The cracks along his arms split wider. Glowing so bright they bled light instead of blood. He collapsed to his knees, clutching himself, his breath ragged. A young girl ran forward, offering him a scarf. "Please," she whispered, "rest." He looked at her eyes wide and shining, reflecting the flame within him. He smiled faintly and shook his head. "The fire does not rest," he murmured, though his voice was hardly more than smoke. The girl did not understand. How could she? But she pressed the scarf into his hand anyway, as if her small gesture could bind together what the fire was breaking. Kaelen wrapped it around his wrist. For the first time in days, he felt human again. The gods still watched. High upon Olympus, they felt the eternal flame's heartbeat within Kaelen. They saw the frost melt from the earth, the rivers flow again, the warmth return to the mortal realm. Some scowled, fearing rebellion. Others turned away in shame, remembering what they had withheld, but none moved against him. Because they saw what Kaelen already knew. His body could not bear the flame forever. He was no threat to Olympus. He was a sacrifice burning itself out. In time, stories began to spread farther than Kaelen himself could travel. Merchants whispered of villages where fires lit themselves when a stranger passed. Shepherds claimed they saw a man of light crossing the hills, his steps melting frost. Children spoke of hearing a hammer's rhythm in the crackle of their hearths, steady and eternal. His name was carried on the wind, not in shouts, but in whispers, not in fear, but in gratitude. Kaelen, the boy who became fire. But Kaelen himself grew quieter. His voice failed him more often. When he tried to speak, the words burned in his throat, spilling as sparks instead of sound. He began to communicate with gestures, his hand on a child's head, a nod to an elder, a simple presence that said more than words could. Inside, though, he wrestled with loneliness. The fire was vast. It filled him, pressed against him, consumed him. But it was not company. It was weight. He missed his mother's voice, the clang of her hammer, the way she hummed while working. He missed being a boy who could laugh, who could dream of tomorrow without knowing it would cost him his life. He missed being Kaelen. One night, he returned to his mother's forge once more. The scarf still bound his wrist, faintly singed but intact. The anvil sat where it always had, steady and patient. Kaelen laid his hands upon it. Sparks leapt at his touch. "I am almost gone," he whispered, though no one was there to hear. "But the world is warm. That is enough." And as he spoke, the forge blazed bright, as if answering. For a moment, he imagined his mother's shadow at his side, hammer in hand, smiling at him. Tears cut through the cracks on his cheeks, glowing as they fell. From that night forward, Kaelen no longer traveled as quickly. His steps slowed. His body dimmed, then flared, then dimmed again, like a lantern nearing the end of its oil. But everywhere he went, the fires still kindled, and the people began to understand. They did not cheer as loudly now. They did not chase him with praise. Instead, they lit their own fires and carried them from house to house, from hearth to hearth, in his honor. They began to keep the flame alive themselves, not waiting for the torchbearer to pass. This was Kaelen's greatest gift, not the fire itself, but the reminder that it belonged to them too. On a quiet hill one evening, Kaelen looked across the horizon. Villages glowed with light. Fields shimmered with warmth. Smoke rose from chimneys like threads weaving the world together again. He closed his eyes. The ember in his chest pulsed faintly. His body cracked further, his hands trembling, but his heart was steady. He whispered, not to the gods, not to the flame, but to the people below. Keep it alive. And though no one heard the words, the wind carried their meaning. Kaelen stood there, a figure of fire fading into the night. No longer a boy, not yet gone, but something in between. A bridge of warmth between mortals and the forgotten gift of the heavens. The fading of flesh had begun, but the legacy of light had only just started. By now, Kaelen no longer resembled the boy who had once left his mother's forge. The world saw a figure wrapped in radiance, a man whose veins glowed like molten rivers, whose every breath carried sparks. To some, he was a beacon. To others, he was a warning. But to himself, he was something far simpler. A vessel that could no longer contain the fire he had carried. His steps had slowed to a measured rhythm. Each footfall felt like it might be his last. Yet everywhere he walked, warmth spread. Snow retreated. Hearths kindled. Children laughed in their sleep as though dreaming of summer. The world no longer shivered. It glowed. And Kaelen, though breaking, smiled. One night, as he crossed a barren plain, his body faltered. He fell to his knees, his palms pressed into the frost. Light bled from the cracks along his arms, bright as dawn. His chest heaved, his breath escaping in a rush of smoke. For a moment, he thought it was the end. But then he heard something, a hammer's rhythm, steady, patient, eternal. He looked up, and in the shimmer of heat above the plain, he saw her, his mother, Myra. She was not as he remembered in her later years, bent with toil. She stood tall, strong, her hair streaked with soot, her eyes fierce. She raised her hammer, struck the anvil, and the sound rolled across the night like thunder made gentle. Kaelen's heart surged. He knew it was no mortal vision. It was memory, carried within the fire itself. His mother lived now in every flame. Her forge a part of the eternal fire's song, and he understood. He was not alone. The people's whispers grew into stories. They said Kaelen's footsteps left blossoms in snow. They said when he passed through a village, even the sickest child grew warm to the touch. Some claimed they saw his shadow not as a man, but as a flame, flickering tall behind him. And with each tale, his humanity slipped further away. His skin no longer held shape. It fractured into plates of glowing stone. His eyes no longer looked like eyes at all, but like twin embers peering from the hollow of a man. His voice, when it came, was no longer voice but resonance, like wind through a furnace. Yet still he walked, because to stop was to fail, and failure meant cold. High on Olympus, the gods watched. Zeus thundered in silence, gripping his lightning but never releasing it. Hera turned away, unable to meet the truth in Kaelen's sacrifice. Athena whispered to herself, as though studying not a mortal but a lesson. Even Hermes, trickster and accuser, stood quiet on the mountain's edge, feathered sandals still. They could not stop him now, for Kaelen was no longer mortal, no longer even defiant. He was a flame carried beyond their reach, and gods cannot chain what does not belong to them. By the river Dros, Kaelen came upon a village shrouded in grief. A pestilence had claimed many lives. The fires they lit for their dead smoldered weakly, refusing to rise. The people sat in silence, too weary even for prayer. Kaelen walked into their midst. He raised his trembling hands, light spilling from the fractures of his palms. Sparks leapt, touching the fires. In an instant, the flames roared high, casting warmth over the mourners. The villagers gasped, tears cutting tracks down their soot-streaked faces. One elder, her voice broken with age, whispered, "You carry the gods' fire. Why do you give it to us?" Kaelen's voice cracked like kindling. "Because it was always yours." And though the words left his mouth as a whisper of smoke, the people heard. They bowed their heads, not in worship, but in gratitude. But the fire within him demanded more than gratitude. It demanded everything. Kaelen's body shook now with each mile. The glow in his veins pulsed violently, splitting wider seams along his chest and shoulders. He often collapsed, his hands clawing the earth, his breath a furnace blast. And always, when he rose again, he left warmth behind. He began to wonder if he had already died. If what walked now was not Kaelen, but the fire alone, wearing his memory like a cloak. The thought did not frighten him. It comforted him, for it meant he had given himself away fully. He had become what the world needed. On the 7th night since leaving his mother's forge, he found himself on a cliff above the sea. The wind rolled in, heavy with salt and silence. The horizon burned faintly with stars, and for a moment, Kaelen felt the vastness of it all. The fire he carried was not just for hearths, not just for villages. It was for everything. He spread his arms. The cracks along his body flared white. Light streamed outward, carried by the wind. For miles around, fires leapt higher, torches brightened, and even the stars seemed to lean closer. The sea reflected his glow, waves shimmering as though touched by dawn. Kaelen whispered, though his voice was more flame than sound, "Take it all, take me." And the fire obeyed. It poured from him, flooding outward. The cliff glowed, the waves burned gold for a heartbeat, the air itself trembled with warmth. Then it softened, spreading gently, seeping into every corner of the world. Kaelen collapsed to his knees. His body cracked, his skin falling away in fragments of glowing stone. He looked at his hands. They were no longer hands. They were fire shaped like memory. And yet he smiled. The breaking of the torch-bearer had begun in earnest. His flesh was nearly gone, his voice nearly silence. But what he gave could not be taken back, because the fire was no longer chained to Olympus. It lived now in every village hearth, in every torch carried through the dark, in every humble flame that kept cold at bay. And though Kaelen's body failed, his gift endured. When dawn came, the villagers below the cliff looked up and saw the faint glow still lingering where he had stood. Some swore they saw a man of light. Others swore they saw only fire, but all agreed on one thing. The warmth had returned, and they whispered his name, not as curse, not as prayer, but as memory. Kaelen, the boy of ash, the torchbearer, the flame that chose to walk. The breaking could not be stopped. By now, Kaelen was no longer a man of flesh. His body was a lattice of cracks and light. Every step a release of sparks, every breath a sigh of flame. His hair shimmered like molten strands, his skin fractured into fragments that glowed and dimmed with each heartbeat. He did not bleed when he stumbled. He shed embers, scattering warmth onto the earth, and still he walked. Each village he entered, fires bloomed before him. Chimneys roared alive without a hand to tend them, for the eternal flame within him recognized its kin and spread itself freely. The people gathered, silent with awe, no longer daring to approach too closely. They saw not a savior to embrace, but a being dissolving before their eyes, becoming something they could not name. Kaelen knew this, too. He no longer spoke. His voice had faded into crackling whispers that sounded more like firewood than words. His thoughts were fire. His memories were fire. Only fragments of Kaelen remained, and they clung stubbornly. The forge, his mother's hand guiding his, the sound of hammer to anvil, the warmth of home. High upon Olympus, the gods watched in silence. They felt the flame's power no longer in their vault, but scattered across the earth, burning in every hearth and torch. They felt their dominion slip, their hoarded treasure carried now by mortals who no longer prayed to be warm. They simply were. Zeus clenched his lightning in fury but did not cast it. Hera closed her eyes in sorrow. Athena leaned forward, recognizing wisdom in Kaelen's sacrifice that no god had foreseen. And Hermes, trickster though he was, whispered softly to the empty air. He finishes what Prometheus began. Kaelen's path carried him back, as all paths do, toward where it had begun. The forge of his mother lay quiet, long abandoned, its stones cold, its roof sagging with time. He entered slowly, each step leaving sparks that clung to the floor. He stood before the anvil, the place where he had first learned that flame was not to be commanded, but respected. And for the first time in weeks, he sat. The silence pressed close. Only the faint crackle of his own body filled the air. He rested his hands on the anvil, his skin glowing brighter where it touched the iron. He whispered, not with voice but with thought carried in flame, "Mother, I am almost gone." The forge answered. Its long dead coals stirred, then flared, as though Maera herself struck her hammer once more. The walls glowed faintly, the air warmed. Kaelen bowed his head, tears, if they could still be called tears, falling as streaks of light. He understood then. His journey was not to end in Olympus, not even in the villages he had saved, but here, where he had been born, where the first spark of his story had been struck. News spread quickly, carried by travelers and whispers. The torchbearer has returned to his forge. Villagers journeyed miles to catch a glimpse. They gathered outside, afraid to enter but unwilling to leave. They saw the glow through the windows, the way sparks danced upon the air, the way warmth seeped into the soil. Some said they heard the sound of hammering inside, though no hammer was lifted. A rhythm steady, patient, eternal. Children pressed their ears to the ground and swore they could feel it, the heartbeat of fire itself. Inside, Kaelen's body crumbled further. Pieces of stone skin fell from him, glowing briefly before fading into ash. His hands were little more than fire shaped like memory. His face was light more than flesh, but he did not fear, because though his body failed, the flame endured. And that was the truth he had carried all along. The fire had never belonged to him. It had never belonged to the gods. It belonged to the world. One evening, as the moon rose pale and full, Kaelen stood for the last time. He placed both hands on the anvil. Sparks leapt upward, filling the forge, scattering into the night sky. Outside, the villagers gasped as the roof glowed with firelight. The chimney roared though no wood burned, and Kaelen, within, bowed his head. "I give it back," he whispered, though the words came as flame, not sound. His body cracked wide open. Light poured out in a torrent, rushing into the walls, the hearth, the waiting night. The forge blazed as though reborn, hotter than it had in decades. And when the light dimmed, there was no body left. Only ash. But the anvil still glowed, and the fire still burned, steady and patient, as though a blacksmith still worked there unseen. The villagers entered quietly, reverently. They found no remains, only a forge alive with impossible fire. One child swore he saw a figure at the anvil, hammering something white-hot, though when he blinked, it was gone. Only sparks remained, falling like stars. From that night onward, the forge never went cold again. Travelers came from far away to see it. Some left with coals carried in clay pots, believing them blessed. Some knelt in silence, whispering thanks to a boy they had never known. But no temple was built, no idol was raised. The people understood. Kaelen did not want worship. He wanted only warmth shared freely. And so his story spread. They said, when a fire flickers without reason, it is Kaelen passing through. They said, if you listen closely to the crackle of a hearth, you can hear a rhythm. Hammer to anvil, steady and eternal. They said he never truly died. He became warmth itself. High on Olympus, the gods felt it. Their vault was empty, their brazier cold, yet the world below burned with life. For the first time, they did not rage. They did not strike, because even they understood. Kaelen had not stolen from them. He had reminded them why fire had been given at all. And in that reminder, even gods bowed to silence. Thus ended the mortal body of Kaelen. But his flame? It burned on, in every home, in every forge, in every child who laughed beside a fire on a cold night. And always, when the world grew too dark, people whispered his name. Kaelen, not as myth, not as God, but as light that chose to walk. After Kaelen vanished into flame, the world did not fall silent. It glowed. Fires burned brighter than they had in generations. Hearths lit with a single spark and refused to fade. Entire forests, once frozen stiff, blossomed overnight. Rivers steamed in thaw, and fields long barren bore grain again. Humanity no longer feared the cold as they once had. The warmth was everywhere, but with the warmth came whispers. In distant villages, people claimed they had seen him. A figure of light passing through doorways, a hand of fire brushing their hearths awake. Children swore they woke in the night to see a man of flame standing beside them, only to find the air warmer, the blankets softer. Blacksmiths insisted their forges kindled faster. Their metal rang truer, as though an unseen hand struck alongside theirs. Kaelen was gone, yet he was not. The villagers told stories by firelight. One tale spoke of a wanderer caught in a blizzard. He collapsed in the snow, certain death had come. But when he opened his eyes, a stranger crouched beside him, cloaked in light. The man pressed a spark into the wanderer's hands, and suddenly a fire burned in the snow, roaring strong enough to hold back the storm. When the wanderer awoke, the stranger was gone, but the fire remained. Another tale told of a widow, alone and grieving. She had let her hearth die, too weary to tend it. One night she heard the faint sound of hammering, steady and patient. She rose, and to her astonishment, the fire blazed anew, though no wood had been added. In the crackle, she swore she heard a voice whisper her name. And then there was the tale of the shepherd boy. He lit a single candle in a cave and watched it bloom into a bonfire that warmed his entire flock. When he asked the flame where it came from, it hissed softly, as if speaking. Kaelen. Such stories spread like wildfire. But what mattered was not whether they were true. It was that people believed. For the first time in generations, men and women gathered around their hearths not in fear of punishment, not in obligation to the gods, but in gratitude. They no longer prayed to Olympus for fire. They whispered Kaelen's name, not as a god, not as a hero, but as one of their own, a boy of ash who gave everything so they could remember warmth. The gods heard these whispers. Once, they would have thundered in anger, demanding worship, punishing rebellion. But this time, Olympus remained quiet. Because the truth was simple. Kaelen had not defied them out of pride. He had not raised armies. He had not sought worship. He had only given. And in giving, he had left nothing for them to take. The flame no longer belonged to Olympus. It no longer belonged to Kaelen. It belonged to the world. And gods, for all their power, could not change that. As years passed, Kaelen's story grew stranger. Travelers claimed that when their torches burned low, a sudden breeze would fan them alive again. Farmers said when they lit fires in the fields, they sometimes smelled not smoke, but the faint scent of iron and pine, the scent of a blacksmith's forge. Children said if you pressed your ear close to the hearth at midnight, you could hear the rhythm of hammer on anvil, steady as a heartbeat. Some even claimed to see him in the stars. On the clearest nights, when the sky was wide and endless, they pointed to a faint constellation, a cluster of sparks that resembled a boy with a hammer. They called it the torchbearer. Whether true or not, the stories comforted them. For legend is not measured in proof, but in the warmth it leaves behind. And so Kaelen lived on, not in body, not even in memory alone, but in every flicker of flame. When a hearth suddenly flared, they said, Kaelen has passed through. When a forge rang louder, they whispered, he strikes alongside us. When children laughed by firelight, mothers smiled and murmured, he is with them still. No tomb was built, no temple raised. Yet Kaelen's presence was stronger than marble or hymn. For he lived where no god could reach, in the simple, enduring act of warmth shared between people. But there was one place his presence lingered more strongly than anywhere else, his mother's forge. Though my era had long passed, travelers claimed the forge was never cold. Flames leapt in its hearth even when no wood was placed, and some nights a figure could be seen at the anvil hammering softly. He looked not divine, not terrible, but familiar, like a boy, soot on his cheeks humming as he worked. When anyone entered, the figure vanished, leaving only a bright fire and the faint sound of metal cooling in water. To the people, this was not haunting, it was blessing. The forge had become a place of pilgrimage, not for worship, but for memory. A reminder of a boy who had chosen to burn so that others could glow. As decades rolled into centuries, Kaelen's name changed. Some called him the Flame Bearer, others the Smith of Light, others still the Eternal Spark. But whatever the name, the truth remained. He was not a god, not a king, not even a hero carved in stone. He was something far humbler. A boy who gave up everything so the world could be warm again. And that was why his story endured. To this day, when the fire crackles strangely, when warmth rises unexpectedly, when a single ember lights a whole hearth, people lean close and listen, for they believe if the night is quiet enough, they might hear it, the rhythm of hammer on anvil. Steady, patient, eternal, and in that sound they know Kaelen has not gone. Because warmth itself is his legacy. Generations passed, The people who had once seen Kaelen with their own eyes faded into memory, then into dust. But the fire remained, and with it, his story. Children grew up hearing it whispered beside hearths. Mothers told it on winter nights when storms rattled the shutters. Wanderers spoke of it beneath the stars, kindling courage on lonely roads. The name Kaelen was carried forward, soft but steady, like an ember sheltered in the palm of time. And though centuries blurred the details, some called him a boy, some a man, some swore he was half god, others that he was only mortal, the heart of the tale never changed. He was the one who gave, not to conquer, not to rule, but to warm. The boy of ash, the torchbearer, the flame that chose to walk. Strange things continued to happen across the land. In villages far from roads, hearths lit themselves on the coldest nights. Travelers spoke of a warmth that rose in forests when they were lost, guiding them to shelter. Sailors said a flame appeared on their masts during storms, steady and golden, leading them safely to shore. Blacksmiths told of unseen hands striking their anvils in the dark, the rhythm so perfect it felt like a blessing. Some said if you watched the sparks closely, they fell not randomly, but in the shape of a hammer swing. These moments were fleeting. No proof could be held. Yet no one doubted, because all who felt them knew the same truth. Kaelen had not died. He had become the flame itself, and still the gods did not strike. Olympus, once fierce in punishment, now stood in silence. The eternal flame was gone from their vaults, yet it burned brighter than ever in the mortal world. Perhaps the gods understood, at last, that the gift was never theirs to hoard. Perhaps they remembered the first spark Prometheus gave, the defiance that made humanity more than beast. Or perhaps they were simply afraid of what mortals might become when reminded that warmth was always theirs to kindle. Whatever the reason, Olympus remained quiet. And in that silence, Kaelen's legend grew louder. Centuries turned. Empires rose and fell, wars raged and faded, but the story endured. In each age, it changed shape, like fire taking new form. For some, it was the tale of a hero who carried a star in his chest. For others, it was the parable of a blacksmith's son who gave away his soul. For poets, it was the image of a boy hammering light into the world. For dreamers, it was the promise that warmth could always be found in the dark. And for the weary, it was comfort, because in every flickering flame, they felt less alone. Legends say that if your fire dims without reason, it is Kaelen passing through, carrying warmth onward. Some claim that if you close your eyes by the hearth and listen carefully, you will hear the rhythm of hammer on anvil, steady as breath. Others whisper that on nights of deepest cold, when the world itself seems brittle, Kaelen walks again, unseen but near, placing sparks in the ashes of forgotten hearths. Not as a god, not as a savior, simply as warmth itself. In time, the people no longer asked whether Kaelen was real. They did not need to. His truth was not in temples or scrolls. It was in the glow that softened the night, in the heat that pushed back the frost, in the way families gathered together around firelight. He was no statue carved in marble, no hymn carved in stone. He was a whisper, an ember, a presence so ordinary it became eternal. For what is fire, if not memory made visible? And so the story ends as it began. Not in Olympus, not in a throne room, but beside a fire. Imagine it now, the crackle of wood, the glow upon the walls, the soft warmth against your skin. The flame dances, alive and patient, never asking, never boasting, only giving. And if you listen closely, you might hear it, the steady beat of hammer to anvil. Kaelen is there, as he always has been, not a god, not a hero, just a boy who gave himself away so the world could remember how to glow again. And as the fire softens you to sleep, know this: every spark that has ever warmed your hands, every flame that has ever lit your path, carries a fragment of his story. A reminder that warmth, once given, never truly dies. It only passes on.